Shalom, friends. Thank you so much for being here. We know others are joining, but we're glad you're here on time. We are here to talk about why we gather, exploring the transformative power of community. And we're here with a great educator, Rabba Shani Gross, who believes that Jewish texts can serve as shared language to connect Jews to the tradition and to each other. The passion is what drives her work as the senior director of education at Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies. Before joining Pardes, Shani was the founding director of the Silicon Valley Beit Midrash. She earned a rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva Maharat and her bachelor's degree from Yeshiva University. Shani is a Wexner Graduate Fellow, Davidson Scholar, a Hillel International Fellow for Rabbinic Entrepreneurship, and a Fellow of V'tichtov, a fellowship aimed at elevating Jewish women's scholarship. Shani has studied at a number of Batei Midrash, including Migdal Oz, the Drisha Institute for Jewish Education, and of course, the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies. Shani particularly loves teaching Tanakh, Talmud, and Midrash. She lives in Berkeley, California, with her husband Chaim, and their three sons, Elan, Navon, and Shalom. Rabba Gross, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I want to thank the VBM team for having me here. It's such an uncomfortable pleasure to hear your bio read. It's been such a long time since that happened. So thank you for that. Thank you for that. I want to just start by saying that for the sake of our conversation, we're going to learn a lot of good texts, a lot of juicy texts. If you can just make sure that the Zoom name that's on your screen is the one that matches who you are, and whether you're borrowing your cousin's nephew's computer, make sure that the name there is what you'd like to be referred to by. And just a note about the Zoom chat, which is that for most of our time together, I am not going to be checking the chat. So if there's something that you want to ask or say, please feel free to use this magical unmute button and say and interrupt. If you have overarching questions that you want to save, there is going to be a time for Q&A at the end. So just some logistical pieces before we get started. Oh, someone loves learning. That's so wonderful. Someone's name is I Love Learning. Amazing. Hello, I Love Learning. I do too. Let's all change our name to that. Okay. I want to start by asking a question. And this time I actually am going to invite folks to the chat, which is we often talk about living in Jewish community, typically spend a lot of time thinking about what is the unique nature of experiencing Judaism in community versus alone. And so I want to start by asking that question, and I want to invite you to, in the chat, write one word that encapsulates, number one, what is your experience of Judaism alone? So one word for what is your experience of Judaism alone? And then one word for what or how you experience Judaism in community with others, okay? So one word for how you experience Judaism alone, and one word for how you experience Judaism in community. Okay, thank you for those who started writing in. I see Lori wrote, I'm imagining that this is the order. Lori, you could tell me if I'm wrong. I believe you're writing that you experience Judaism alone as solace and in community as solidarity. Warren writes that experiencing Judaism alone is isolating, and experiencing Judaism in community is lonely. Warren, you are not alone. I get that answer from many folks. Shmuley, alone, deep and sweet, and communally is tense and intense and political energy on brand. Beautiful. Carrie writes, in community, she experiences Judaism as love and alone as spiritual. I've asked this question now to many folks. This curriculum that we're going to learn together is part of a larger curriculum at Pardes called the Tour of Gathering. And I've gotten a whole range of interesting and different answers. for the way that we as individuals experience Judaism alone and in community. But what does our tradition have to say about the unique nature of communal experience? What versus an individual experience? What happens in community? What do we mean when we say community? What are the different makeups of Jewish community that can exist? Is one of them better than the other? What do each afford us? What opportunities do they afford us? What are some of the challenges, pitfalls, even dangers of being in community versus experiencing Judaism alone? So that's where we're going to start. And we're going to start by looking at a text from Pirkei Avot, from the Mishnah, rabbinic text, where the rabbis are trying to understand what are the different communal makeups that exist within our tradition, and how does God, in God's self, show up in those different spaces, and what can we then assume about those different communal experiences? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, oh, thank you. And Steve, thank you for your contribution. He said alone is unfettered and community is not real. Ooh, I'd love to unpack that more. Okay, I'm going to read and then we'll explore together. I want to also just name, normally we would spend time in Chavruta, but for the sake of this class, we're going to just learn in Chabur. We're going to learn together. We're going to unpack the text slowly and just really enjoy the delicious taste of this Torah. So let's dive in. We have Pirkei Avot 3:6, again, a Mishnaic rabbinic text written, codified somewhere between 0 to 200 CE in the land of Israel. And this Mishnah, this book of Mishnah in particular, the Transformative Mishnah, is really trying to, it's called the Chapters of Our Fathers, really trying to give a sense of how we are meant to live and understand life in a very deep and beautiful way. And so this is what it says. Rabbi Chalafta, son of Dosa of Kfar Hanania, said, when 10 sit together and occupy themselves with Torah, the Shekhinah, i.e. God, abides among them. As it is said, God stands in the congregation of 10, of God. And from where do we know that the same is true even of 5? How do we know that God is present even when there are 5 people together? As it is said, this band of his, he has established on earth, quoting from the book of Amos. And from where do we know that the same is true, again, that God is present even when there are 3? As it is said, in the midst of the judges, he judges. And where do we know that the same is true even of 2? As it is said, then they that fear the Lord will speak with one another, and the Lord hearkened and heard. And the text, the quote goes on, and a scroll of remembrance has been written at his behest concerning those who revere the Lord and esteem his name. And from where do we know that the same is true even of 1? As it is said, in every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come unto you and bless you. So here we have a text where we're trying to understand, how does God show up in different communal spaces? I'm curious what groupings you see that are mentioned here that may have some significance to them. What are the numbers you see mentioned here? We have a bunch of different communal numbers. What are the ones that are mentioned, and what significance might that hold within our tradition? We have, we have 10. What significance in our tradition do 10 people who gather hold? What does it remind you of? Okay, Alex writes in the chat, a minyan. Beautiful. So, right, in our tradition, we have this understanding that 10 is a minyan, the minimum amount we need to gather to hold a minyan, a prayer space. We have 10, which is sort of our maximum number here, even though, again, it's sort of the minimum number we need to create a minyan for prayer. It's also the minimum number we need for a minyan around when we're saying the tefillah, the bracha, after eating, we're able to invoke God's name, and we have 10. And we're told that there's 5, then 3, and the proof text for 3 is in reference to judges. We have in our tradition, a court of judges is the minimum court, what size one can have is a group of 3 judges. 5 is sort of a number that confuses many of the commentaries. We're told that maybe 5 is like a hand or a band with 5 fingers. Maybe it's in reference to three judges and 2 litigants. And then we have 2, where in our tradition, right, a chavruta, 2 people who are studying and learning Torah together. And there we're told that God shows up and hears, and God listens, and Vayikatev Sefer Zikaron Lefanav, and it's written in the Book of Remembrance. And then we're actually told, not only is God present when there's 10, but even when there's 1, God is there, and we're told, in every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come unto you and bless you. So even when there's just 1, there's blessing. It's very nice that we have this listing, but it's important to notice that the text is doing a bit of work here to communicate something really interesting, because we're told that God shows up when there are 10, and then we say, the question seems to be implied that of course God shows up when there's 10. Right? That's Navon, my love, that's obvious. But how do we know that God shows up in these other spaces? We use the word in Hebrew. Very nice. Warren adds Asara Dibraya, right? We have the 10 commandments, the 10 plagues. There's a lot of significance with this number of 10, and certainly around God and the number 10. Beautiful. And so it seems like the text is implying that 10 is the obvious number. We can expect God to be present. And in fact, not only is God present, it's as if God stands, right? The proof text we're told is that God is standing. God is at attention. When there are a group of 10 who are sitting and occupying themselves with Torah, God is at attention and God is actually standing. There is sort of a reverence to this number of 10. And so then the text uses this word, afilu, right? Luminayin afilu. How do we know that even when there's 5, even when there's 3, even when there's 2, even when there's 1, that God is present? Because it's so obvious when we have 10. It would seem to imply that there is a hierarchy here, right? Of course, you know that God is present when there's 10, but we're here to tell you that even when there's just 1, there is a divine presence amongst you. For folks, and going back to this question of your experience of Judaism alone and in community, how that resonates with you. And I can see that people are feeling a little uncomfortable saying words out loud. I want to invite you to, but also if the chat is really where you're going to stick, please, however you're going to, whatever works for you. How does this text, which again seems to imply that there's something obvious about God's presence in a group of 10, and yet we're sort of here to remind you that even so, God is present in smaller groups, and even when there's just 1, how does that speak to your responses about how you experience Judaism alone versus in community? Laurie writes, people are a physical manifestation with whom to interact. God is ethereal, though present. Beautiful. Can you say more, Laurie?
Yes, I think maybe we can all relate to an experience of, worship and contemplation or prayer when we feel God's presence, right? And that happens many times when we're alone. But think about times when we are sharing communal worship and communal joy. It's very different, and the energy is different, right? It is, now I'm a professor of genocide studies and public health. Crazy mix, I know. That being said, all of these studies came out, right? After COVID, about how people's neural pathways changed because we weren't together and we weren't experiencing that face-to-face time together. There's actually something that happens when human beings gather together. And when we invoke the sacred in the presence of God, it's even more meaningful. You know, I lead the Jewish Student Union. I'm the faculty advisor at Agnes Scott College, and just the beauty of even doing Shabbat blessings together, right? In a big group. So different.
Beautiful. So Lori, it sounds like for you, this text rings true. Of course, I would presume that God is present. The divine is present. There's something unique that happens when there's a group of 10. And it would make sense that then that hierarchy would exist, that it's that intensity is felt in a group of 10. And sure, God's also present when there's one, but there's something special that happens when there's a group. Anyone have a different experience of that? Anyone wanna counterbalance? In fact, Steve, you wrote alone as unfeathered. Oh, Toby, please. And then Steve, if you'd be willing to share. Yes, Toby.
Yeah, hi. I'm curious about whether there is more or less of a connection to the divine when you are in a group, but only in a Zoom context. And I'm an old person, and during COVID, I was obviously part of the high risk group. And so going out during the height of the pandemic was just not a possibility. I also was sick during that time, which didn't help. But I found it very comforting to attend Erev Shabbat and Shabbat worship online. Was that just me, or did anyone else have that? I mean, obviously in person is better. But if that's not a possibility, think about all the people who are handicapped and can't get to a physical Shabbat group. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm curious about anybody's answer.
Beautiful. I think, Toby, what you're pointing to in some way is like Rabbi Chalafta from today, right? It sounds like we were in the most alone individual experience we all had. And so even being able to join a Zoom where we weren't even physically in person, but to be part of a communal gathering space still provided that sense of comfort, divine, something unique that happened. So I really appreciate that example. I'm curious, I think it was Steve, if you're willing, who I think wrote, alone was unfettered. And for you, the experience of Judaism in community was not real. So I'm curious, Steve, and also, please, if you're willing, and you can also write in the chat, if you want to counter any of these experiences of the idea that it's obvious that God is present when there's 10, but what about when there's just one? And again, I'm opening up to Steve, and to my brother, I saw Shmuley also that with one there's a sweet and spiritual aspect to experiencing God alone. It's interesting to notice that the proof text for this last example, how do we even know that God is present when there's just one? The proof text we're given is, in every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come unto you and bless you. So not only is God present, but there's blessing. But this proof text is from the book of Exodus, from Sefer Shemot. And it's specifically the moment where, right after the Aseret HaDibur, right after God speaks the 10 commandments to the entire Israelite congregation at Sinai, the reaction from the people is, Moses, this is too much for us. We actually need you to intervene. We need you to go alone and have this divine meeting on our behalf. And it seems to suggest that there sometimes, a la this notion of it's being in community, sometimes it's too intense, sometimes it's too much. Yes, there might even be the divine, maybe even more divine in that space, or a unique sort of divine in that space, but there are also dangers. Sometimes it can be too intense and too much. Right? And per Warren's point, right? Sometimes, right? If that communal space is one that is not welcoming, it's really hard to find God in that space. And sometimes it might just be easier, and there is blessing that you can find God alone. Thank you for writing that, Warren. I appreciate that. So we see in this text that God shows up in many kinds of spaces, whether it's one that appears the most obvious, which is 10, in a group of 10 or more, but even in smaller groupings, and even if there's just one, God does show up. So there's a hint that there's, it does not say, this text does not come out and say directly that that being in community is necessarily better than being alone, but there's something that is uniquely elevated, perhaps, or transcendent about being in community and having a communal experience. But it doesn't say what that is. What happens when we're in community that can't happen on our own, that can't happen in our experience of Judaism alone, especially given that, again, at the end of this text, we're told that there is blessing. And that brings us to our second source, which we're really gonna look at outside, which is this is from the tractate Brachot, from the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, and tractate Brachot on focuses a lot on prayer and blessings. And one of the questions that this source comments on, it's commenting directly on our first source. One of the things that it notices is, why did we have this whole conversation? Why did we do this whole exercise? If at the end of the day, God is present when there's just one, why couldn't we have just started by saying, when is God present? Even when there's one person. End of story. I didn't have to do this whole strange numbers game. Why couldn't I just started with one and finished there? And so it in this source, they go out of their way to say, no, there's something that happens when there's more than one person present, particularly when it comes to engaging in divine work, in Torah study. And so what is it? And we're told, where is it derived that even one who sits and engages in Torah study divine is present? As it is stated, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come and bless you. And since the divine presence rests even upon one, was it necessary to say the divine presence rests upon two? Right? Why couldn't I just have said, listen, God's present with one. Why did I have to say 2 or 3 or 5 or 10? And we're told two people, when there are at least two people present studying Torah together, their words are written in the book of remembrance. Their words are written in the book Sefer HaZichronot. However, a single individual's words of Torah are not written in the book of remembrance. Now, what significance is this book of remembrance? What are we referring to? Well, we're about to enter the high holiday period, and Sefer HaZichronot is one of those ideas of the book of remembrance, where on Yom Kippur, our deeds are going to be recorded and sort of codified in this Sefer HaZichronot. It's also in Megillat Esther, in the book of Esther, scroll of Esther. The king Achashverosh has a book of remembrance, Sefer Zichronot, where he records all the good deeds that have been done by people in his community, by people of his province, and that's where he remembers that Mordechai was the one who helped him. So there's this idea that when two people, when we learn alone, I should say, God is present. Yes, God is present. Yes, there is blessing, but that bracha and that Torah only exists for that one person. It's only when there is more than one, when there is at least two people learning together, that their memory, communal memory, can happen. Because if I learn Torah alone, that Torah just stays with me. But if I learn with others, there is a communal memory project that takes place, according to this text. And so this text, built on our first one, introduces this idea that when we are with others, there is a project that can take place of collective memory. But what exactly does that mean? Oh, beautiful. And Lori writes, it is like a groundswell, a critical mass, like a crowd going at a concert, a single flame becoming a fire. And even thinking about that image of a flame, right? A flame, when lit, exists as one flame. But one of the amazing things that it can do is that it can light others without being distinguished itself, which is also a midrashic idea about the way that we learn and give Torah to others. Is that it's something that can ignite in others while continuing to ignite within ourselves. Beautiful. So we're told that there is God is present when there is one, God is present when there's 10, but there's something that happens when there is more than one, when we're not just experiencing Judaism alone, but with others. There is a unique access we have, this idea of collective communal memory that we are building. But what does that mean? What does that actually look like? And that's where we're going to get to our third source. This is from the Babylonian Talmud tractate Megillah, and it has a lot of beautiful and interesting things that happen in this tractate. And one of the things in particular is that there is no tractate called Tractate Sefer Torah. There's no tractate for a Torah. Most of our laws regarding how we are meant to keep a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll, comes from this tractate actually. And this chapter of the tractate of Megillah specifically deals with subversive concepts around ownership and kedusha and holiness, particularly when it comes to holy objects and the money that comes from the sale of a holy object. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but can people just sell a Torah scroll? Is that something that you can do? And what happens to the money that you get from that sale? What if you sell a synagogue? Can you sell a synagogue? And so a lot of that is discussed in this tractate. And where we're going to zoom in on in this conversation is actually specifically, how does one dispose of a holy object when it is worn out and no longer usable? What do I do with an old worn out Torah? Can I throw it away? How do I dispose of it? And so we're told from Babylonian Talmud tractate. Oh, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. Ooh, beautiful. Ooh, this group has gorgeous analogies. Thank you. Learning together can be like a note on a chord. We are so much bigger than our physical presence. Beautiful. Okay. So jumping into this source 3, the sages taught articles of a mitzvah, in the Hebrew, tashmishei mitzvah, articles of a mitzvah. How do we dispose of them? They can be thrown out after use, literally taken, put them in the garbage. Articles of sanctity, tashmishei kedusha, articles of the divine, that have divinity, must be buried. Okay, now what do we mean? Now the text is going to go on and say, what do we mean by tashmishei mitzvah? What constitutes an article of a mitzvah, and what constitutes a tashmishei kedusha, an article of sanctity? And so we're told, what are the articles of a mitzvah? A sukkah, a lulav, and tzitzit. A sukkah, a lulav, a shofar, and tzitzit. 3 out of 4 of those are going to be very relevant for us in the next 2 months. Starts really late this year, so the next 2 months or so. These are articles that, according to the source, when we're finished using them, we can put them in the garbage. A lulav, what does everyone do with their lulav? Throw it out, put it in the compost. Okay. Now, what about tashmishei kedusha, articles of sanctity? What are we talking about when we say articles of sanctity? These are the articles of sanctity: cases of Torah scrolls, phylacteries and mezuzot, and a container for a Torah scroll, and a cover for phylacteries and their straps. Now, it's important to notice that in our first example of articles of the mitzvah, we're literally talking about the object that we use to do a mitzvah, sukkah, lulav. In this articles of sanctity in tashmishei kedusha, we're actually not even talking necessarily about the Torah scroll, which is the obvious, right? This is It's not just something we use for the sake of Kedusha, not just an article of sanctity. It is sort of sanctity itself. But we're told even the case that you put the Torah scroll inside of, or the container, even the cover, the bag you use for tefillin, for your phylacteries and their straps, that has Kedusha, it has sanctity, it has holiness in it. And because of that, you are not able to just throw that out. So if you had a bag that you use to put this, people have sometimes very nice bags they use to hold their tefillin. If that bag gets a hole in it, you cannot throw it in the garbage. You have to bury it. Now, you'll notice that there's something, what separates these two? What makes something an article of mitzvah versus an article of sanctity? And you'll notice that all the examples when it comes to tashmishei kedusha, articles of sanctity, have to do with the words of the divine, the word of God, right? The case for a Torah scroll, the case for phylacteries, which really hold verses of the Torah inside of it, and the same for mezuzot. All of these objects, these ideas of tashmishei kedusha, of articles of sanctity, are things that come close to touching the word of God. And so the implication here is there's something unique and holy and divine about these objects that even come close to the word of God. And so we bury them. And now the text goes on and we say, okay, I understand these sort of other objects, but what do you mean bury them? What do I do with them? What is the ideal way to dispose of some of these objects that come close to the Torah, to the word of God? So I'm going to skip ahead. And we're told, Mar Zutra said, wrapping cloths of Torah scrolls that have become worn out. What are we talking about? So nowadays we all have, a lot of our Torah scrolls have these really, really cute, beautiful jackets that we put them in, these little outfits. But back in the day, those didn't necessarily exist. You would literally wrap a Torah scroll in cloth. And so the question becomes, what about that cloth, right? We know it touches the Torah itself. What happens when that wrapping cloth becomes worn out? What's the ideal way to dispose of that cloth? And we're told the ideal way to dispose of it is that they may be made into shrouds for a corpse with no one to bury it. And this is their burial, i.e., we find a corpse with no one to bury it, which is referred to in the text as a meit mitzvah. This is something, the idea of a meit mitzvah, of an unknown corpse that you find on your way. It's a very serious thing that our tradition takes very seriously. And we're told that if you pass an unknown corpse, you are meant to stop anything you are doing in order to bury that person. And with very few exceptions. In fact, there's a lot of Jewish laws that you can pass in order to do this mitzvah of burying an unknown corpse. And so we're told that the ideal way to dispose of this wrapping of a Torah scroll is to wrap this meit mitzvah and bury it with that person. In other words, this wrapping that was used to wrap the Torah, we now use to wrap a person. In other words, really converting that person into a Torah scroll. We have shifted from a Torah of paper to a Torah or cloth. We wrap them instead. And going back to this idea of communal memory, when we do this, when we pause and we stop and we make the effort to bury this person, we are ensuring that they are not forgotten. Right? We are ensuring that we see each person as containing within themselves a Torah of their own. And that we are taking on the responsibility of making sure that they are not forgotten. Now, what about a Torah? How do you dispose of a Torah that's worn out? What is the right way to do that? And we're told, as Rabba said, a Torah scroll that became worn out is buried next to a Torah scholar. This is the ideal way to bury a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll, which is to bury it beside a Torah scholar. And not even necessarily the best of Torah scholars, we're told, even one who only studies Jewish law, but maybe is not proficient in their analysis, that is enough to merit being buried next to a Torah scroll. But then we're told something really interesting. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, and when that Torah scroll is buried, first you must place it in an earthenware vessel, as it is stated, and put them in an earthenware vessel that they may last for many days. This is a reference to the book of Jeremiah, where God commands the prophet Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, that despite knowing that the temple is about to be destroyed and the Israelites are about to be dispersed from the land, God makes Jeremiah promise that he must buy a plot of land from his cousin and pay full price for that land and receive the deed to the land and then put that deed in an earthenware vessel and bury it as a radical sign of hope that and memory that we will return to this land one day. And so back to this imagery of the Torah scroll being buried next to the Torah scholar, there's a suggestion here that we have literally the Torah shebichtav, the written Torah, beside the Torah shebal peh, the Torah scholar, the oral Torah, the one whose job it is to continue to spread Torah. You bury these two Torahs together as a radical sign of hope and memory to say, not only are we not going to forget you, but we are going to return to you one day. This is not a forever goodbye. There's, you might even say there's something messianic here. We are not only bound together in our memory, but in our future, in our shared destiny, in past and in our future, and what is to come. Okay. In our last 4 minutes left, Alex, if it's okay, I wanna just end before we give space for questions, and folks can please feel free to comment or give any reactions in the chat as we move forward. But I want to. I think that this text at least gives me a lot of hope. And a lot of comfort in this idea that in every person there is a Torah that is meant to be preserved and noted and remembered, and that there is something that happens. Again, there's something unique that happens when we gather together, when we if and when that community is making sure to give every single person the special attention that the Torah should get. There's something that can happen uniquely with the divine in those spaces, but we're told about the past, right? Preserving our past communal memory and our future, right? Returning what is to come. It's a promise of what is to come. But what about right now? And I want to just share in our source 5 a poem that was written by Rav Elchanan Nir, who's a contemporary Israeli poet and writer and editor, who published some powerful poems as a result of October 7th, in response to October 7th. And he wrote this poem that is in many ways a charge. What is needed in this moment of anguish and pain and fear and uncertainty? And I'm going to read it in English. He says, now we need a new Torah. Now, like air to breathe, we need a new Torah. Now, gasping for air and with choking throats, perhaps in reference to the homes that were set on fire during October 7th, our breath, our very source of life was taken for us. Now that we're gasping with choking throats, we need a new Mishnah and a new Gemara. We need a new Kabbalah, a sense of the soul. We need, and all inside all the brokenness and the salt and the desolation now, a new Hasidism and new Zionism, and a new Rav Kook, and a new Brenner, and a new Leah Goldberg, and a new Yehaveh Da'at, and new art, and new poetry, and new literature, and new cinema, and new old words. In the Hebrew, milim chaditin atikin, and a new love out of the terrible weeping, for we were all washed away in the rivers of Re'im and Be'eri. And we have no mountain within us, no other tablets, and no Moses, and no strength. And now everything is in our hands. And in this text, it seems the suggestion here is, right, we need a new Torah, we need a new roadmap. The Torah so often is analogized to a roadmap, a blueprint for how we're meant to live in a world. But now we need, Rav Elchanan Amir is saying, we are living in a totally radically new world, and we need a new Torah. We need a new roadmap for how we're meant to survive in this moment. A new Mishnah, a new Gemara. These are texts that were built in order to remember, but also not just remember what was, but also how do we function in a moment after brokenness when we lost our temple? What are we meant to do? So even those texts came after moments where worlds shifted. And new Rav Kook and Brenner, we need new religious and cultural pillars and leaders, new art and poetry, new old words, which is a reference to the Zohar, but also a reference to Hebrew language itself, milin, atidin, atikin, these new old words. Even the language of Hebrew was not a usable language until we put our minds to reviving this language as a spoken modern language. Because we were all washed away in the flood, like the flood itself in the beginning of Sefer Bereshit, of the book of Genesis, where there's a flood, a new world. We have entered a new world that we do not know. And we have no other tablets and no mountain and no Moses, right? A moment where we had one tablet and it was shattered and we needed another one. We are now in a moment where we need new old words. And now everything is in our hands. And I think there's a suggestion here, and this is where I'll just end, that it is our job to see ourselves as part of this collective project. It really is in our hands. And with that, I just want to thank you. And I'll end here. It's been a pleasure learning with you. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to, or thoughts they want to share, please feel free.
Rabba Shani, it was a pleasure to learn with you. And as you said, we have a couple minutes left. Would love to open it up if anyone has a question or a comment. Well, we give people a couple minutes. I have sort of a technical question that is maybe a little bit off topic, but I hope you don't mind. I noticed in the source where you were talking about the articles that would be thrown away versus ones to be buried, it mentioned the lulav and not the etrog. And I think, although I could be wrong, that you are not supposed to throw out an etrog, but I was not sure why and what the difference there is.
It's a great question. I actually don't have the answer off the top of my head. It's not discussed in that section, but it's true. A lot of people do preserve. I'm curious, Shmuley, if you know about preserving the etrog.
Preserving the etrog. So I'm sorry, I was distracted for a moment. What's the specific question?
I just noticed that you can throw away a lulav, but not an etrog, and I could not remember why. Sorry, very off topic.
Oh, okay.
It's an interesting question. I'm also not sure that the premise is true, right? It may not.
Right.
I don't know that that you're not meant to throw an etrog, but Shmuley, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people who make liqueur from the etrog, and then they put their lulav, out in the trees, out in the woods or whatever. So I normally think of it as the opposite. Although, none of them have the name of God on it. None of them are specifically holy items. So I think people do have ways of discarding. Yeah.
I mean, at some point it's a fruit. It will expire.
Right.
Warren, did you have a question? Oh, if you can unmute yourself, that would be good.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Going back to your first point, how you opened this, which is about the sense of community, the sense of belonging. And I travel a lot, and I go to shuls all over the place. And I was at my shul the other night, and after Marav, it was a Rosh Chodesh, so our Chazan said the appropriate things about Rosh Chodesh, and it was Monday, so it was the day I'd woken up in the morning. I guess it was Monday or Tuesday. I woke up in the morning and heard the 6 hostages were found dead, and there are other things here in Israel. And so I put the challenge to there were about 20 of us, so it was twice a minyan. And I put the challenge and I said, what do you guys feel about this? We care. I'm here tonight because I'm feeling really sad, but I'm also angry. And their collective answer, more than half of the people said to me, you know what? We don't even watch, we don't even look. And a rabbi who's a wonderful rabbi, I mean, if he had been there, his message is always, we have to recognize, we have to fight, we have to be vigilant. And so my question is, given that kind of attitude, how do we write a new Torah for really what I would call the post-October 7th?
Such a beautiful question. I think that your intuition is right, that our texts certainly these texts are charging us to not look away. Right, looking away means that you will forget, and we know that for shamor v'zachor, not just remembering but preservation. And we are a people, and our tradition is a tradition that has worked really hard to be remembered and preserved. But that can only happen when we show up and look and participate. And I think that that's exactly what Elchanan Nir is charging us with in that poem, which is, all of those texts and all of those moments happened because different leaders of our community throughout time and history said, I'm not going to let this go away. I'm not going to forget. It took action. So I really appreciate that question. I think it's a beautiful one. Thank you. I hope that you feel like you got a response.
No, it was a very good answer. And I think that's one of our weaknesses as an American Jewish community and abroad. And that's kind of why I think we're losing, we're losing in the PR thing. I mean, it's a word that seems to be wanted to be run by and ceasefire negotiated, specified by the media in a sense, right? Which is total falsehood. So it seems that people are too willing to give into that. I appreciate your words. I've been doing a lot myself in social action, and it's very frustrating. I sort of feel like people are sort of free riding my coattails.
I think something that I'm thinking about as a result of these texts are, in what ways do we feel like we are part of a global Jewish community? And I wonder to what extent that, if that lack is leading to so much of our own internal disagreements around how to respond to this moment. I think I saw one more hand. Maybe I missed it. Maybe it was a comment. Well, Lori chatted, Alex, you have a source for you about the etrog. Please write to the group with any summaries or takeaways.
Thank you. I'll look into it and report back.
Please do, so that we can know what to do with our etrog this season. Beautiful. Any other thoughts or questions, reactions?
Right. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to learn with you. And thank you, everyone, for being here as well. Just want to let you all know about our next class, which will be on August 29th with Dr. Elias Sachs. Was the Apostle Paul a Jewish thinker? And that'll be at 1 p.m. Pacific time again. So hope you can all tune into that as well. And thanks again. Have a great day.